wrinkle. I think there were two plans we think potentially that need to be added, and it involves highway plans, which Mr. Dix is currently awaiting a response from. So please don't take that list as absolute final, but it has got the initial bucks of content that it's correct. We also have the famous box of plans if you physically want those. I mean, we can look after them until the end of the inquiry when you take them away with you, or if you want to obviously look at them during the course of the inquiry, we have the box and we can give it to you.
Yeah, I'll have them, but I might give them back to you like on Friday until I've got a car.
I think there are storage. There is storage facility as well here if you want to leave anything here. So but we will confirm hopefully before we rise at the end of this week exactly what the final list of plans are.
Okay, so what's in here is potentially not the final list of plans.
No, I think there might be. It's more likely to be additions rather than one extra plan. Mr. Fraser tells me.
Mr. Bird, you look like you're itching to say.
I'm not itching, so I'm just. My understanding is that you do have all of the plans for approval. That there may be an additional illustrative plan, which is being, or a concept plan, which is for inclusion. Now, the only question I was wondering, is this going to be an ID or would it be a core document as guardian of the ID list?
I don't know whether it actually even needs to be a guardian of the ID list. That's a great job title. I don't know whether it actually needs to be a core, because I just asked for a list of plans and they're all in the core docs anyway. It's just for my own purposes rather than printing off or.
Can I hand out the missing plan?
Yes, please. And is that in the list that I've got or not?
I was going to.
Okay.
Oh, it is.
It is, right, okay.
It's not in the document.
Not in the one in that plan, so it's on the list.
Okay.
It has the interesting. I'll wait to get back to the microphone so those live. Well, actually, they're not live streaming, are they? It's on. Great. Well, where we're staying, there's a signpost for something called a metaphysical car park. Now, none of us have the intellectual ability to understand what a metaphysical car park is, but this plan also has a similar thing, a conceptual roundabout.
Okay.
But I am told by Mr. Dix this matters and this is important, so this is the additional plan. So now, if you put that in, that very smart coffee table which is the application plans, then you will have the complete set. And I think Mr. Bannon helpfully has had a discussion with Mr. Canavan and agreed that those are the plans, but hopefully that is what you're considering whether to draft planning commission or not.
Okay, or rather recommending. Okay, right, thank you, that's really helpful. I can do some weight training with that as well. Just going back to the site visits, so if we park the site visit for Friday, we'll arrange something later on this week in terms of Monday's site visit, maybe check the weather forecast as well as the week goes on. You mentioned also perhaps being able to get me into a studios just to have a look.
Yes.
Yeah, Ms. Nevin.
Yes, ma'am. We can help arrange access to Pinewood and Shinfield as well, if that's necessary.
Yep, that would be really helpful. I think one studio. So I'm happy for you all three parties to agree which studios you want me to go and visit. But I think it would be handy just to go and have a look actually at how a studios operates, just for my own benefit and understanding of the evidence. So if that can be arranged for perhaps Monday the 3rd of Feb. Just thinking about available dates in the hope that we can get the site visit done this Monday coming. Ideally, but I am also happy to go unaccompanied if there's someone from Pinewood could just show me round, or wherever, Shinfield or whichever studios it is. But I am also, I think for parity it would be better if 3 people from each party came, but if that can't be done, then if it's just a neutral.
No, I think just, yeah. I think it would be more sensible that there were 4 of you, 1 from each of the parties.
Yeah, that's fine. Happy with that. Okay, thank you. So plans I've got, core docs talked about. I think that's about it. Anything else from anybody else before we start?
Just a couple of matters from me. First, you asked about whether Natural England had confirmed their satisfaction with the alternative SANG provision. We've got an email chain dealing with that, which I think will be ID 10.
Thank you, Guardian of the IDs.
That's right. And there's also, regret mentioning that, there's then.
You may live too.
Mr. Kennett's also prepared an errata sheet to picking up some of the corrections for his
Okay.
proof.
So that'll be ID.
Do you want it as an ID doc?
How big is it? Is it just? Probably, yeah, if that's okay, thanks. So that'll be, where were we up to? 11. ID 11, and that's ID 12, ID 10 for the Natural England. And anything from you, Miss Nevin? Thank you. In that case then, Mr. Bird, could you introduce your witness and also let me know what 4 docs you would like me to open, please?
Adam, yes. In terms of the main documents, clearly if you could have his proof, Mr. Kennett's proof and his rebuttal proof, so 9/7A and B, Mr. Smith's material, which is core document 8.4. We will also be going to 2106, an appendix F, which was the Pegasus LVI addendum appendices, principally the photo montage. So there'll be a series of those. The landscape character assessments, which are in CD 6, 7 and 5/12, together with the national character area, which is in CD 6, 8. And no 5/12, 6, 7 and 6, 8. 5/7, which is the Chilterns Area of Outstanding Beauty Management Plan as titled. 6/6, which is the Landscape Institute TGN 0221, assessing landscape value outside national designation. 5/8, which is the position statement on setting. And then there are some section drawings in CD2, 2111B, D and E, which relate to Westhorpe Park. So CD2, 11, 1B, 1D and 1E. One, 111. Yep. B, D and E. And we may also refer to the MPPF Glivia 3 as necessary, and another policy and the local plan as well, but I don't think you need to have those open at this stage. So, Mr. Kennett, if I could introduce you. You're Chris Kennett. You hold a Bachelor of Science Honours degree and a diploma in landscape architecture, and you've been a chartered member of the Landscape Institute since 1996. And you also hold a diploma in urban design and a Masters in Sustainable Development. And you're employed as an urban designer and landscape architect by the council, having joined it in 2015. And your role includes providing advice to applicants and to your colleagues on matters of urban and landscape design and assessment of the likely impacts of development on the urban and rural landscapes. And you set out in 1.4 of your proof that you were assigned the case by the council at the pre-application stage, and you have been involved throughout.
That's correct.
And what I intend to do is take the evidence as read, but we'll use the section headings of the main proof to structure the evidence in chief and refer to the documents as necessary. If you find we're spending too long on documents you're already familiar with, do say, and we'll move on. But
We probably won't, given the amount of evidence that's with this inquiry and the amount of prep time I've had.
no, well, that's helpful. That's helpful indication. But say the offer's there, so if we're not helping, then ask us to move on. Now, as far as your main proof of evidence is concerned, at the time you wrote that, you'd not seen Mr. Smith's evidence and obviously hadn't seen the landscape and visual impact assessment review he'd undertaken. So your evidence was principally directed at the LVIA addendum, which is in 2106 in terms of the core documents. And so your rebuttal proof effectively responds to his review. Is that right, Mr. Kennett?
That's correct. Yes, we didn't have Mr. Smith's appraisal or landscape visual impact assessment at the time the proof was written. So
I'm not sure whether people are picking up. You may need to be a bit. Have you turned on? And are you?
it's
Right. May need to be a bit closer.
hopefully that's better. Yeah.
People here at the back. Yes. Good. So in terms of the evidence in chief, again, I want to start with the site character and context and the Wickham District Landscape Character Assessment 2011, which is core document 512. And it may just at this point be helpful to have Mr. Smith's Appendix A to hand, because he has an extract from the Pegasus LVI addendum figure, which at plate A1 on page A5 of Mr. Smith's Appendix A shows the site in the context of the surrounding landscape character areas. It's A5, A-5 in Appendix A, which is his landscape and visual review. PDF page 10, I'm being told.
That's it.
Good. And that sets the appeal site in the context of the surrounding landscape character areas. And we're going to start here with 26.1, which is the Thames floodplain.
The Thames floodplain in part extends into the Chilterns National Landscape to adjoin landscape character area 21.1 to the north of it.
So we can see the A4155 just to the north of the red line site, and we can see the Thames floodplain character area extending north of that, and that's all in the national landscape.
That's correct. On the ground, these are not hard boundaries. There is a sort of interplay between the two of them, but for the basis of this assessment, we're working on the basis of the plan we can see here in front of us. Its strength of character for the LCA 26.1 Thames floodplain. Its strength of character is and intactness is described as moderate, and it has a number of visual sensitivities that are relevant to this site. Notably river courses, ponds and lakes, and the associated habitats and wildlife that go with those. Views across open expanses of water along and across the River Thames and up the valley sides to higher ground. There's open undeveloped meadow and farmland areas along the River Thames, which offer tranquility and calm. And the flat landscape and limited woodland accentuates the visual sensitivity of the landscape. So those are particularly applicable to this site.
We're all three of us, if I difficult to pick up.
Oh, terribly sorry. Try not to get in the way of what's in front of me. Actually, I can hear. That's better as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Amongst the landscape guidelines attached to this landscape character assessment is conserving open views, cross open expanses of water along the Thames and up the valley side, conserving open undeveloped banks of the river between Marlow and Medmenham, and Marlow and Bourne End, which particularly relates to this site, which provide tranquility and contrast, and to avoid vertical development along the floodplain, which will greatly impact on the low-lying and open character of this landscape character area.
And I think just to assist the inspector, if we could turn up CD 512, which is the Wickham District Landscape Character Assessment, and within that go to PDF page 49. We can see the LCT floodplain section at 26.1. We have the Thames floodplain. And then there are a series of sections starting with key characteristics on, as far as the Thames floodplain is concerned, page 55.
It's PDF page 55.
Yes.
Yes.
And then 57, the description of the Thames floodplain, its landscape character. Moving through to an evaluation, which is on page 61. And then identifying landscape guidelines. And in terms of the landscape character assessment itself, there's reference to Marlow, there's reference to its settled character, and Mr. Smith emphasises the urban characteristics. What do you say in relation to those aspects?
Marlow is an element in this landscape. It's located at the one of the few river crossings across the Thames, and so it's a natural location for settlement to have sprung up. It provides contrast to the surrounding countryside, and there is visibility from this landscape character area to the edges of Marlow. So it fulfills a function and character of this landscape area by contrasting with the surrounding countryside.
Then if we look at, go back to plate A1 in Mr. Smith's appendices to the Thames Valley slope, which is 21.1. And again, we also stay within the landscape character assessment at 512. And here we go to PDF 1, so it's the first page of the extract from the core document. LCT 21, the valley slope. Similar approach in terms of the assessment, key characteristics, followed by description, analysis, and then guidelines. What do you draw from the landscape character assessment in relation to the Thames Valley slope, which is relevant to the appeal proposals to Kennett?
This landscape character area lies on slightly more elevated land to the floodplain. It's a transitional landscape really between the rolling farmland, which on the plate on A5 is the green area further to the north, again from LCA 21.1. It's mixed agriculture with hedgerows and trees throughout, and includes some large woodland blocks on its upper slopes as well. It does adjoin the suburban edge of Marlow, and is cut by the A404 and A4 and 55 principal roads in this area. Of particular interest are the network of footpaths that can be found in this area, and it's an open sloping landscape that allows long views across the Thames Valley, and away from the roads. This character area has a relatively rural and peaceful character. This also lies within the Chilterns National Landscape. Sensitive elements relating to this are woodlands, which provide enclosure and backdrop to the views, and they also provide recreational value, such as for walkers. The open expansive views from high ground southwards across the Thames are particularly relevant to this appeal, as are views from the Thames floodplain back up the slope. In parts of the rural and peaceful character is also sensitivity, as are the open farmed slopes between settlements that provide separation. It's a moderate strength character. It's impacted by a human impact, including roads and settlement edges. So the landscape guidelines for this landscape character area promote conservation of the open expansive views from the high ground that we've mentioned, to ensure that new development is sensitively sited and integrated into the landscape, to maintain the undeveloped settlement farmland between settlements, and to improve integration of existing urban edges.
And that could be seen at PDF 14 of CD 512 in terms of the range of guidelines. Now, you touched there, Mr. Kennett, on the landscape designation, and particularly the Chilterns AOMB. And I think if we turn to core document 507, which is the management plan for the national landscape, albeit dating from a time when it was the AOMB.
Yes, there's in this document on pages 10 and 11, it summarises what the special qualities of the Chilterns National Landscape are. The overriding principle of the management plan is to conserve and enhance the natural beauty of the area. Special qualities include panoramic views, which is very relevant to this appeal, farmland interspersed with trees, hedgerows, orchards, parklands, woodland cover, and ancient routeways, national trails and rights of way sort of thread their way through this area. Other parts of the AOMB demonstrate additional factors such as chalk streams, common land, and the chalk escarpments, which primarily refers to the northern edge, northwestern edge of the Chilterns, and diverse archaeology and heritage. Parts of the Chilterns also are especially tranquil. From the point of view of the interface with the landscape character areas we've just discussed, the Chilterns defines sort of 4 areas on the following 2 pages, 12 and 13. And in broad terms, landscape character area 21.1, which we just discussed, is part of the plateau and dip slope that is described in the Chilterns management plan. And
we can see there in terms of the
coloration
map
plan.
on 12.5, on
Yep.
page 12, sorry.
And landscape character area 26.1 broadly corresponds to the river valleys that are identified and described on page 12 of the management plan.
And we can also then put that in the context of the National Character Assessment 110, which is core document 608, I think pages 7 and 8.
Yes, and National Character Area 110 includes a range of key characteristics which are all echoed in the your National Landscape Management Plan and the local landscape character assessments, including the incised chalk plateau that shelves southeastwards towards the London Basin, enclosed views within valleys, woodlands and hedgerows, a mixture of arable woodland and commons, floodplain landscapes which are restricted in extent in this area, high value habitats, nucleated settlements along watercourses and at the foot of the scarp, a distinctive River Thames floodplain, which is a focal point for settlement and recreation, amongst other things. Major transport routes pass through this area. There are parkland landscapes and estates, and extensive rights of way, commons, woodland and parkland to provide access to the countryside.
Yeah, is there anything else you want to say at this stage about character generally?
As opposed to character immediately around the site?
Yes, before we turn to the site itself.
Character of the area generally is quite active. It's popular walking areas. It sits between a number of settlements. Marlow adjoining the site, but Bourne End to the west, to the east. We have Flackwell Heath and High Wycombe to the north. So there's a significant local population that use this area for recreation. It exhibits many of the characteristics that we've described here in terms of particularly important to the open panoramic views from the Chilterns National Landscape and from LCA 21.1 in particular.
And how does the site and the Thames Valley floodplain relate in terms of the landscape and how it reads to the Thames Valley slope and indeed the Great Marlow rolling farmland beyond?
This area is very much a big part of the setting for the Thames valleys, and there are views through landscape character areas 26.1 and 21.1 from the Thames Valley, including slopes to the south of the river, and the woodland at the north of landscape character area 21.1 provides a backdrop on those views.
So we've looked effectively at character north of the river. We also need to touch upon the character south, which is within the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. And here we need to go to core document 607, which is the Windsor and Maidenhead Landscape Character Assessment. And within that, to PDF page 103. Which is the settled wooded chalk knolls, within which there is Cookham Dean at 9B and Winterhill at 9C. Again, if we look at plate A1 in Mr. Smith's Appendix A on A5, we can see both character areas to the bottom of that figure.
We can, and both character areas define at the northern edges the steeper scarp slope that's a mixture of woodland and open grassland that overlooks the Thames Valley in a north and northwesterly direction across the Thames to the landscape character areas and Shortland's national landscape that we were discussing before. This character area is also very popular for recreation, again because of the local settlements nearby. And the key characteristics here, I'll skim them through the most sort of relevant ones. Rolling, undulating, woodland covered landform, and open chalk grassland in adjacent landscapes. So there are extensive areas of woodland in this area, and the effects they have on the character of this area is to enclose a lot of views. So views outwards are intermittent. The grassland areas are more continuous views from that area.
And again, in terms of the relationship between the landscape character areas, both to the north and south of the site, how relevant are they to the assessment of the effects of the development on the appeal site itself?
The landscape character areas, excuse me. The landscape character areas, both north and south of the Thames, borrow heavily from each other in terms of their landscape. There's a high degree of intervisibility between them. So a large part of the character and subsequent amenity for members of the public and those that live and work in the area is that intervisibility between these. So we'll go on to talk about things like value and so on, but the contribution that the Thames Valley and the Thames slopes, as seen from Winter Hill, are a very significant part of that area's character, and vice versa, in that the Thames Valley and Thames Valley slopes have a very strong relationship with the wooded backdrop that is Winter Hill to the south.
Okay, then let's move to the site itself, please, which is, and its use and condition, which you address at 2.9 of your proof. And if you could just summarize your assessment of the use and condition of the site. We may, I think, here refer to your figures in your appendices, figures A2 and A3.
The site has been restored after mineral extraction and landfilling operations over a number of years. From the evidence we have, it's at least 30 years that this has been in some state of restoration. It's not been restored very well, I think that's common ground. But nonetheless, I included figure A2, sorry, to my proof, to highlight that the appearance of the site, at least from a high level, has a lot in common with the surrounding countryside, in contrast to settlement de Marlow, which lies to its west. In detail, the site has been somewhat neglected since its restoration and has become overgrown with rough grass and other species, as well as scrub, that sort of thing. So it's not in an agricultural use or anything at the moment. There are some elements of the past use, typically fencing and gates that are in disrepair, and they allude to the site's history. But nonetheless, these remain as open areas of landscape, open fields, if you like, with margins that support hedgerows and trees.
And in terms of its recreational function and its relationship to the RUR4 allocation, the local plan allocation as a country park.
And the site lies in an area that has well-established recreational uses. It has a public right-of-way that runs directly between Marlow to the east and to the west, and Little Marlow to the east. And I mean, my figure A2, sorry, A3, is a aerial view from Google Maps, which highlights some of the recreation activities that are taking place here at the moment. I draw attention to those immediately around the site in the first instance, where there's fishing and water skiing, which lie to the west of plots 4 and 5. There is camping and outdoor pursuits that take place to the south of plot 5. There are jet ski lakes to the east of plot 5. And further east from that, a larger lake which is used for water skiing, open water swimming, paddleboarding, and so on. Further to the east, then there is the fishing and bird watching at Spade Oak. Throughout this whole area, there's opportunities to walk, including the footpath I've mentioned already. But there's also a permissive footpath that runs immediately west of plot 5, which links then with a crossing across the railway line down to the Thames Path. So there's an opportunity there in the immediate vicinity of the site to access the Thames Path National Trail to the south. And there are further opportunities eastwards to link back across the railway line into this area. And because of that connectivity, sort of walking through this area is quite popular.
Good. Then let's move to landscape value, which you deal with in 213 and following of your proof. And there is a dispute between you and Mr. Smith as to the landscape value of the site. You say it's high in a valued landscape. He says that overall it is of community value on his assessment. And you are criticised for raising the issue of a valued landscape. I think only in your proof, albeit I think it's also raised in the statement of common ground, so at a late stage. Could you just explain how it has arisen at a late stage?
Yes, indeed. Neither ourselves or the appellant's landscape consultants discussed whether or not a valued landscape, whether the site and its context constituted a valued landscape. The council had always maintained that the site was of higher value than that attributed by the appellants. But to be fair, we didn't continue that argument to then identify the site and its surroundings as a valued landscape in the context of the MPPF. So that was perhaps remiss on our part, but the issue then emerged when discussing the statement of common ground with Mr. Smith, and that prompted us to then address the MPPF context for this and its landscape value.
And you set out in 214 that you've taken account of the landscape introduced technical guidance note 0221 and also the earlier advice in Glivia 3 on landscape value. We just go to core document 604, which is 2021. Yes, it's core document 6004. and it's the technical guidance note 02/21.
I ask you to bear with me. I'm having trouble with my laptop here. Sorry, Mr. Bird, will you give me that reference again, please?
Have you got the core document itself?
Not in print and in digital. No, I haven't.
It's core document 6004.
Right, I'm there. Thank you. And which page number was it?
I was going to go to PDF page 11, table 1, which is the table you've referred to in 214 of your proof. Which sets out the, as you point out in your proof, the non-exhaustive list of considerations to take into account. To just explain your position and the conclusion you have reached on the landscape value of the site, taking into account the factors that you've relied upon.
Landscape value of the site is and whether or not it might be considered a valued landscape can be drawn from a number of factors, which include natural heritage, cultural heritage, landscape condition, associations, distinctiveness, recreation, scenic qualities, wildness, tranquility, and functional factors. And one other point it makes as well, so at 215 of my proof, I highlight this. You know, when assessing the value of the site, it's important to consider not just the site, but its context as well. And you know, appreciating the site as part of the surrounding landscape rather than on a field by field basis is more appropriate way to go about this, rather than as you make, you know, consider a small and smaller area, a lot of those features that might make up the wider landscape simply can't be there because the site's so small. So I make the view that take the view that the site and its context have a significant natural heritage value by virtue of the range of semi-natural habitats that are there, and there are historic connections with Westhorpe House, the site lying within part of the former estate. There's, as I've already demonstrated, a multitude of recreational activities in the local area already, which the council is actively seeking to enhance. And the site is green, unbuilt at the moment, effectively no buildings on it at all. And it contributes to the scenic quality of the wider landscape, within the wider landscape character areas as well.
Good. And then in 220, you set out paragraph A4.2.11 of the technical guidance note, which says a valued landscape is an area identified as having sufficient landscape qualities to elevate it above other more everyday landscapes. So having regard to those factors you've outlined, what's your conclusion in that respect?
I believe that the site and its immediate landscape context together demonstrate that they support a number of these factors. As I sort of briefly outlined, the consideration of being a valued landscape doesn't need to be reflected by designation, but I think with the factors that I've just outlined that are present at the site, these together contribute several factors to how we might define a valued landscape. There aren't any thresholds.
Mr. Kennett, I'm sorry. I'm very frightened. Your voice drops off the time. You're very close to my phone, but you just.
Maybe just adjust it. Yes, so just make sure, can you just adjust the microphone again? You need to be a bit closer to you again. And it maybe you're looking towards the inspector understandably, but then losing the,
A lapel mic might might work, save us a lot of trouble. Yeah, so there are no thresholds. And indeed, the guidance says that, you know, one factor could be sufficient. We have you know, several factors here. And again, at 221, I sort of make the point that it's sort of too narrow to consider just the appeal site as within the red line boundary, but its surrounding landscape also contributes to determining whether this is a valued landscape.
and you pick up that point in 226 of your proof in terms of the relationship, functional and perceptual between the appeal site and the national landscape to the north and Winter Hill to the south.
Yes, sort of having set out in the preceding paragraphs where TGN 221 and the guidelines for landscape and visual impact assessment are aligned on this matter. You know, I've said the site forms an integral part of the landscape, and it has been restored from its degraded past as a quarry and landfill site. It has open water bodies that are somewhat rare in the wider landscape on account of the underlying topography. And it gives rise to a distinctive landscape with highly scenic qualities. Trees, scrubs and remnant hedgerows and the grassland complement those water bodies and create a mosaic of habitats with conservation and natural heritage value. And then there's in particular the range of recreational activities that are taking place here now. Its contribution to the wider landscape.
You are dropping off again for me,
Sorry.
slightly.
Wow.
It's all right. You don't,
I'm hearing a lot of it.
so you don't need to read what you've written in the proof. You can just expand on it. That's more helpful to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. So, and yes, in 226, I reiterate that point about the interrelationship between the landscapes surrounding it and the site.
And then in 228, you've referred to the Chilterns AONB boundary review, and you've got appended to your proof core document 9.30, which is the Natural England, one of their consultation responses on the planning application,
Yes.
which relates to the review process which is being undertaken. What position have they reached to date?
It's now been confirmed that the area within which the site is located has now met the criteria that would permit it to be designated as part of the expansion of the Chilterns National Landscape. So it was previously a candidate, but without any further confirmation of whether that might go ahead. This now suggests.
Have I got that?
Yes. CD 930.
30, right.
Yes.
So yes, it's not confirmed, but the as a designation, but its quality and its suitability for designation has been confirmed.
What you were saying then, it was almost as if it was actually being confirmed.
No,
No.
that hasn't got that far yet, but it's moved on a notch from where we originally were. We knew it was within a candidate area for expansion, and the submission from Natural England explains that it has now been found to meet the requirements, I think is the word, or something to that effect, to be considered for designation.
Good. So, I mean, your conclusion is that it should be treated as a valued landscape for the purposes of paragraph 187 of the
I
MPPS.
think that reinforces the argument that the site and its immediate landscape are of sufficient value to be considered a valued landscape.
And you there referred to the linkage with the national landscape to the north, and I just there want to put that in the context of the setting position statement issued by the Conservation Board of the national landscape. So if we could go to CD 508.
Yeah, I have that.
We have the position statement
Yes.
on setting. And if we go within that, please, first to paragraph 6, which is on page 3 of 14.
States that views out of the AONB and into its surrounding areas can be very significant. And similarly, development proposals affecting views into and out of the AONB need to be carefully assessed.
And how does that relate to the special quality you identified earlier in terms of the network of footpaths and rights of way within the national landscape?
Well, the footpaths and rights of way provide ample opportunity for views out of the AONB, particularly into the Thames Valley to the south, where the site is located.
And then if we stay with in the possession statement, we go to paragraph 14, which addresses the setting and says setting does not have a geographical border. What are the considerations which the Conservation Board advised should be taken into account when assessing whether or not a development outside the area has the potential to affect the natural beauty of the area itself?
Well, it lists a number of factors. In fact, I'm looking at paragraph 15. I mean, the setting doesn't have a geographical border, but I don't think it's any doubt that the site and the context and the landscape context it sits in lie immediately adjacent to the AONB and or the national landscape. So it is very much in that setting. And it says in paragraph 14, very large development may have an impact even of some considerable distance from the AONB boundary. Well, this is a large development on the AONB, sorry, just outside the AONB boundary. So paragraph 15 goes on to talk about blocking and interfering with views from public viewpoints and rights of way. Breaking the skyline, which for the most part in most views that's not the case with this development. The visual intrusion caused by new transport corridors. And there's various other ones as well.
You identify which ones you consider for this site affected or it affects?
Yes, some loss of tranquility through the introduction of lighting, noise, traffic. The abrupt changes of landscape character. So at the moment there's, if you like, a gentle transition from the AONB southwards, and this development can have an impact on that. Those are the principal ones, yeah.
Okay, then let's move on. In your proof, you turn to policy. Given that there's agreement as to the relevant policies, we can take that as read. But if we can turn to section 4, which is the appeal scheme and the proposed development, I think we can take that as read. You've set out your position, but perhaps you could just summarise what you see being the principal challenges of the appeal scheme in terms of the landscape and indeed visual assimilation.
Principal challenges arising from the development are its location adjacent to the Chilterns A and B national landscape. Its visibilities have already discussed in the wider landscape. It's a development that's rather unlike anything else in Marlow, which it appears to be an urban extension, given the number and scale of buildings, their height, their close spacing, the mass, where there is very little breaking up of the collection of buildings. Mr. Pryor was saying yesterday, it's a working landscape, and so this scale and mass of development in what is currently countryside outside the urban area is what is especially challenging. With buildings up to 21 meters height towards the center or away from the edges at least. We have a new road junction on the A4 and 55, which will have a significant traffic impact in that location in terms of activity. Most of the landscape mitigation is at the edges in the way of screen planting. There is also some treatment to the buildings by way of green walls and green roofs, I acknowledge that. And there has been a lot of design work to create built forms that at least provide some variety and interest. The other challenging part of the development is the backlot in plot 5. This is perhaps an unusual kind of development in that it will constantly change throughout the life of the scheme. So the nature of the backlot is the repeated assembly and disassembly of sets and everything that goes with that. So unlike the rest of the site, which will have a construction impact initially and then an operational phase, which is static, plot 5 will have an ongoing dynamic character to it throughout the life of the scheme.
Good. Then I think we can move to the appraisal of landscape effects, which is section 5 of your proof. And in terms of methodology, I mean, you set out in your evidence that effectively you agreed methodology with Gillespie's, who were the original landscape consultants engaged by the appellant. Is that right?
That's correct. We agreed the landscape methodology with Gillespie's prior to them carrying out the initial landscape and visual impact assessment. And in our initial appraisal of their conclusions and the conclusions of the subsequent landscape and visual impact assessments submitted, we broadly followed the same methodology. One of the key areas in which it differs is that they don't use matrices to take perhaps a slightly more formulaic approach to working out what this is.
Gillespie's.
This is.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
OAMs. Yes. Sorry. Yes. Beg your pardon. Yes. The Pegasus LVIA uses matrices in a more formulaic way, and whereas the Gillespie's methodology and the approach we've taken uses professional judgments to weigh the various factors that feed into things like sensitivity of receptors, magnitude of change, and so on.
And we can see that methodology because it's at 1 core document 1227J, 1227J, which is Appendix E to the original Gillespie's assessment. Perhaps if we go within that to PDF page 11, given we're on landscape effects. Sorry, it's PDF 13, beg your pardon, my 13, table 6. Indicative criteria for assessing likely magnitude of landscape change. Got that, Mr. Kennett?
I do, yes. Yeah. So there's two tables. In fact, table 6 is assessing landscape change, and table 7 for assessing magnitude of visual change. They both employ a sliding scale between indicators that are likely to have a higher magnitude of change, and those that are likely to have a lower magnitude of change.
Good. Then let's turn to the landscape effects, which you addressed and responded to in terms of the evidence, including in your rebuttal and response to Mr. Smith. And if we start with the site and its immediate context, which lie within, as you already identified, the Thames floodplain, which is landscape character area 26.1. I think the principal difference between you and Mr. Smith does boil down to the value accorded to the site in landscape terms, doesn't it, Mr. Kennett?
It does. The value is one of the factors that feeds into determining the sensitivity. So the value of the landscape and its susceptibility to change, the changes of the type that the development proposes, leads to its sensitivity, and then combining that judgment with the magnitude of change, we arrive at the conclusions of what the residual effects are.
Yes, so in terms of susceptibility, you say it is of moderate to high susceptibility. I think Mr. Smith says high to medium and medium sensitivity, whereas you have a slightly higher level of sensitivity to the change, and you say it's moderate to high sensitivity.
Yes. This is where the judgments about the extent of the effects of also the judgment of the magnitude of change that arises from the development. So I'm of the view that a greater magnitude of change takes place on this site. I, as explained, the site, to my mind, is read as part of the surrounding landscape, not just within the red line boundary. I've talked about the value that is attributed to it by ourselves, and therefore I think the sort of moderate to major adverse landscape effect would result from this.
And if we turn up your rebuttal proof, where you've got the comparative assessment table in D1, as far as the overall character landscape effect, both you and Mr. Smith identify there would be a major, moderate, negative in terms of the landscape character of the appeal site and its immediate context. Both conclude significant.
That's correct.
However, there is a difference if we go on, stay with that table, if we go on to 26.1, the Thames floodplain beyond the site, we can see recorded the minor negative outside the national landscape, Mr. Smith's evidence, and moderate minor negative inside the national landscape, whereas you have major, moderate, negative east of Marlow and minor negative west of Marlow. So again, if you could explain the difference of judgment there as between you.
Yes, the minor negative effect outside of the national landscape. We've taken the view that this encompasses, this addresses the area. The site is an integral part of the area west of east of Marlow. So this is, broadly speaking, between Marlow and Little Marlow, that area. And this development is a very profound change within that landscape, and therefore are of the view that there can't be a minor negative landscape impact where it is such a fundamental change to the character of that landscape from being green and open to being substantially built, at least in its northern part. The site is, and particularly the built-up part of the site, is very much on the edge of the national landscape, and this is still part of the Thames floodplain that extends north into the Chilterns National Landscape. Again, high-density built development framing that edge of the Thames floodplain. I don't see that being a minor influence on that landscape character. That's much more enclosed and urbanised than it is at the moment as a result of the development.
Okay, then in terms of the Thames Valley slope, again, there's a difference here. Mr. Smith identifies a moderate minor negative effect, and you've identified a moderate negative effect. In terms of the sensitivity of that character area to the development, how would you identify it?
The sensitivity of that landscape is high, because it is an integral part of the Chilterns National Landscape. So it's my view, by definition, it has to have a high sensitivity. So the effect of the built development of this nature in close proximity to that, and as I've described before, borrows heavily on the Thames Valley landscape as part of its character. So I'm of the view that that is a moderate effect on the landscape character, and a significant one.
And in terms of it's an indirect effect, what do you say that indirect effect will be?
The indirect effect is the enclosure of this landscape by urban development, and that separation of the relationship that the landscape character area has with the Thames Valley to the south, to the Thames floodplain to the south.
And then I think we can move to Winter Hill. You address in 514 and 515 of your main proof. You agreed, I think, with Gillespie's that had a high sensitivity to the type of development proposed.
Yes.
They, like you, identified an adverse significant effect.
That's correct.
And we see from your comparative table that Mr. Smith's conclusion is it's moderate and minor negative, and he takes issues with the Gillespie's conclusion. Again, here, if you could explain why you have assessed the effect as being moderate and significant.
And this is a similar situation to we've just described for the Thames Valley slope to the north. It's a landscape that borrows heavily from the outlook from it as part of its character, and therefore, while the development is not adjoining this character area, it is very influential on the views out from this character area, and the intervisibility between the settled wooded chalk knolls of Winter Hill and the Chilterns National Landscape and Thames Valley slopes to the north.
And in terms of 515 of your main proof, you assess how the development would change the landscape in that location.
Yes, in you know, the particular view from the western end, but we'll look at that from a visual impact point of view. But the site is perhaps at its closest to Winter Hill at this point, so it occupies a significant part of the foreground, and it changes the character of the landscape that sits between Winter Hill and the Thames Valley slope to the north. So the continuity between these landscapes is lost by introducing the significant sort of urbanization of the valley floor.
If we just take up Mr. Smith's appendices here and go to his Appendix E. And within that, page D5. It's very unkindly numbered his appendices with letters which don't in all instances match the appendix reference, but it should be D5. We'll see where we can see Winter Hill landscape character area.
Yes.
'72 PDF, I'm told, yeah. We can see that his view is this, in terms of the landscape receptor here, it's of local authority value. So it's valued medium to low susceptibility and medium to low sensitivity. To what extent do you differ with the susceptibility and sensitivity ratings accorded here?
I'm of the view that the susceptibility of this landscape is at least medium, but the sensitivity of the site should therefore be higher than the medium low that Mr. Smith says here. And I've taken the view that it's a moderately adverse significant effect would take place in this location. And by some methodologies, if you said the susceptibility of a site is medium and the sensitivity is medium, and the magnitude of change is going to be at least medium, if not more, then you end up with.
Just because I didn't catch that either. You moved away from
I was reading the wrong bit.
again.
So sensitivity is medium, and with a magnitude of change that is at least medium, then you come up with a moderate adverse effect or something higher. So So I don't agree with the medium-low ratings for either susceptibility and sensitivity.
Okay, let's then move to the appraisal of visual effects, which is your section 6. And here we go to your rebuttal appendix and table D2. Yes, sorry, it's Mr. Kennett's rebuttal appendix, table D2, which is on page 14. The assessment of residual visual effects. And we'll start here, I think, with Westhorpe Park, because there's a difference of view as to the significant effects on the residents of Westhorpe Park. You have it as moderate adverse. Mr. Smith, moderate stroke minor negative, though I think that's over the period of time. I think year 1 it's moderate and reduces to moderate to minor at year 15. You could just explain your position, and here I think you wanted to refer to the section drawings at 2111 B, D and E.
Residential views from these residential areas wasn't originally considered by ourselves as felt that would be dealt under private residential amenity, but as it's come up in Mr. Smith's proof, I thought it might be useful to briefly address that anyway. Section 2 is in the first instance the one that I wanted to look at, where the Westhorpe Park is a community of park homes. They're sort of single-story dwellings, but nonetheless set along a street or a loop street, and it appeared that the consideration of impacts on here was really to do with just views from within people's homes or gardens, and I thought it useful to pick this up and say, well, there's more to it than that. There's the outdoor space within the streets where people circulate, and these would offer, in all probability, rather more open views in some instances, where you have, for example, a vista along a street towards the site, by virtue of being set back from the perimeter, and any screening that either exists or is proposed there, you would have greater visibility of buildings of this scale that would lie behind it. So we don't have any photomontages in this regard. But working from the sections and what I understand of the site, there would, certainly in the first instance, before any of the landscape buffer and screening proposed along the northern edge of Westhorpe Park, there would be much more significant views of the buildings that are proposed in Block 2A. Thought it also useful perhaps to look at section 1 on that same plan, which is an east-west section through part of Westhorpe House and the northern tip of Westhorpe Park. Section 1 shows the southern wing of Westhorpe House. This is the contemporary wing rather than the historic element of it. And on that section indicates trees. Next to that part of the building, and then part of Westhorpe House, Westhorpe Park to the right of that. This section is misleading because there are no trees between that part of Westhorpe House and plot 2A. Those trees are in the background, but on the line of the section, that is actually a car park. And on that basis, I suggest that there will be much more open views for residents in that part of Westhorpe House, looking into plot 2A and the buildings there.
Just so I'm understanding this right, you talk about the trees between Westhorpe House and the old coach house. You're saying that's car park. So from
That is a car park if you look at it on
if you're
plan.
on the car park, you'll see the site. You won't be, there's no trees there.
Not so much from the car park, that may be true, but the line of sight between the dwellings in Westhorpe House and plot 2A we would be unobstructed by any trees, any existing trees anyway. So if a look on Google Maps aerial views would make that point.
Yep, been looked at on site. Now, as far as recreational users are concerned, start, I think, in terms of the areas and issues in dispute with viewpoint N. So we take up Mr. Smith's drawing MFS 004, which is the viewpoint location plan. It's his drawing 004, Madam, which is in the first of the drawings bundles in the core document list. I hope it's in 4D. Do you have 4D? It's the last drawing in 4D. Eight 4D. Core document 8 4D. Thank you. And want to go to viewpoint N, which is to the east of the site, on the footpath between Little Marlow and the site, and to the east of viewpoint 12. That is that is, you should have N there, madam. Letter N. It's the viewpoint N to the east of the site. Yes, at this point, just to identify where we're going at this point. Yeah. We'll come to the detail. And that's fine. Well, as long as we're all looking at the same thing, that's the key. Now, as far as the viewpoint N is concerned, if we go to your D2 table of comparative effects, under the recreational users on rights of way, this is 3 down, and there are viewpoints N and O. we can see from the viewpoint location plan. Gillespie said moderate and significant effect. Pegasus a minor effect. Mr. Smith a moderative negative, but no moderate negative but no significant effect. You have major moderate adverse effect at N and a moderate adverse effect at O. So if we could just put that in the context of the photo montage. And if we look up 2106 ZF, or document 2106 ZF,
Rather than running through every single viewpoint that's contested, would it be more helpful if both Mr. Kennett and Mr. Smith on site stopped me at that viewpoint and said, these are the ones that are contested?
perfectly
And I can
happy
just
with
have a
that.
look.
Yes, I'm perfectly happy. That's
Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Rather,
Yeah.
because obviously we're going to like various.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do
documents.
many, madam, but I was just going to
Well, if we're
point.
going to just point out the main ones then. And
Yeah, that
yeah,
it
and
was only
where
the
they
main.
come
I'm
to
certainly
play.
not going to go to every viewpoint and every difference. Just going to pick out, I think, 4 key ones, effectively, if you're happy with that. But no, bear in mind your comment there, madam, that it is going to be best judged on site in due course. But if we could just go to CD 2106 ZF, and if you could just explain why you differ from Mr. Smith in terms of what you'll see from the footpath, and perhaps look at the length from O to 12, so viewpoint 0 or O to 12.
So viewpoint N, or so viewpoint O is the most easterly of the views, and we're approaching the site in a westward direction, passing viewpoint N, which is closer to the site, and ultimately viewpoint 12 is at the entrance to the site. So viewpoint N, the existing view, illustrates this as a largely unbuilt landscape. We've got quite a naturalistic footpath through a very pleasing sort of avenue of well, it's a mature hedgerow with trees on each side of the path. So and there is open fields to the left and to the right. The right hand side encompasses the athletics track and the small building that's associated with that. The track itself you don't particularly see, but there are some retractable lighting columns there which highlight where it is. And there's a backdrop of evergreen trees that provide the skyline in that location. So this is, the amenity of this path is quite attractive. And if you move on to the proposed photo montage, the backdrop to this view changes quite substantially, in that there are the what are predominantly sound stages that are visible here. They're the taller buildings in the site. And while Mr. Pry yesterday was talking about the using smaller and more articulated buildings at the northern and southern edges of the site, we don't have the benefit of that here. So the existing trees remain in place, but the skyline has now changed, and there are views of the upper parts of the sound stages very clearly across the full length of this boundary. So I've taken the view that that's creating a much more urban enclosed character to this view, and you know, on site you'll get a feel for what the scale of this might be like, and so there's definitely value in looking at that. And I concluded from this that this is more than a moderate change, because viewpoint O, which is further away along this path and with a more of a partial view of the site, we concluded the change there, you know, was less than this. This is much more significant. So hence the moderate to major visual effect in this location. And as part of that sequence, as you might expect approaching the site, where in viewpoint 12, for example, there will be quite a profound change to the view, and that's where a major adverse effect is likely to take place. So viewpoint N is part of that sequence of increasing effects, adverse effects.
And again, we can leave the inspector in due course on site to form a view there. Then I wanted to go just north of the A4155 and west of the A404 to viewpoint 9, which is a view within the national landscape, looking over the vineyard. And here we can go to CD 106ZN. And this is on footpath 19-1. It is, Madam, yes, 2106ZN.
So this is a view from the public right of way. We're in the Chilterns National Landscape here, and we're in landscape character area 21.1. I think I have correct. We're looking south eastwards in quite a wide panorama in this view. So what we have on the right hand side of this, beyond the trees, there's a woodland at the bottom of this field, and we've got a glimpse of Marlow in the middle ground. So we can see rooftops of houses, and we can see a few rooftops of the commercial and industrial buildings at the eastern edge of Marlow town. The backdrop horizon is part of Winter Hill, and that horizon extends across the full width of this panorama. To the left-hand side, we don't have Marlow in the middle ground. Hidden from view is the A404 and the A4125. Sorry, the A4155. We can, I think, just about make out the poplar trees, which are characteristic of the northern edge of plot 1, essentially. So we have some discrete urban elements in this panorama to the right, but we have an uninterrupted view down the Thames Valley to the left-hand side of this view. If we go to the proposed photomontage, we can see quite a significant change to the centre and left-hand side of that view. We have a very significant number of large buildings that are now appearing, at least in part, above the intervening trees. Many of these buildings are coloured in a darker colour, which is an appropriate thing to do where these are mostly seen against a backdrop of the land rather than the sky. But in that view, we have what I understand to be the multi-storey car park near the northern entrance, which is more or less at the just to the left of the centre of this view, and that's very noticeable. So the character of this view is changed to become much more enclosed by built development, which appears like an industrial park. And going back to what we were talking about with landscape character and how the development separates that continuity between essentially north and south of the Thames, we've got the same situation very visible here, whereby the proposed development is now interrupting this view and dividing the foreground part of the Chiltern National Landscape from the background, the Winter Hill landscape.
And so that's the basis for your judgment in terms of the effect on the view here as major, moderate, adverse.
That's correct, yes.
Then the third I want to ask about is viewpoint 3. And here I think we go to CD2 106K. Sorry, 106. It is 106K. And it's viewpoint 3, which is just outside Bloom Wood. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
On footpath 11/1. To the top of MFS 004. So again, Mr. Kennett, here your judgment differs from that of Mr. Smith. He has a major, sorry, wrong one. He has a moderate negative, not significant. You have a moderate major adverse effect in this view with the correction on your errata sheet. Forgive me, just getting your errata sheet up. I think it's
Beg your pardon, that's still major.
Major, beg your pardon, is it major?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have a major effect in this view. Again, if you could explain the difference between your conclusion and that of Mr. Smith.
Yes, we have a foreground of gently undulating fields and hedgerows, pockets of woodland, and in the middle ground we have a mixture of woodland or trees with some of the settlement at Marlow set amongst that. In the background, we again have Winter Hill and further parts of the Thames Valley extending in a westward direction. It's a very scenic view. It's not without the urban elements in it, or the edge of Marlow. But on the whole, this is an attractive rural view. As we say, we are in the national landscape. And if we move on to the proposed view, which incorporates the proposed development. We can see that there is a significant expansion of urban development across the middle ground of this view. It's clearly a very dense form of development, as an appearance like an industrial park from here. It occupies quite a wide part of this view, and again, this interrupts the landscape continuity that exists from here towards Winter Hill in the background. The built elements are uncharacteristic of even the existing landscape, where we can see parts of Marlow, and is a very significant intrusion into what is a largely unbuilt area. Given the sensitivity of this view being in the national landscape, I feel that this is a major adverse effect.
And then if we could move to the south of the Thames and Winter Hill, if we look at your comparative table, there's no dispute between you and Mr. Smith that in terms of viewpoint 8, which is to the western end of the open access area of Winter Hill, there would be a significant adverse effect. He has it at major, moderate. You have major adverse at that viewpoint. Moderate adverse you have at P2. Come back to P2 in a moment. There is a dispute between you and him in terms of significant effects in terms of the open access area at the eastern end of Winter Hill. You have major, moderate adverse effects recorded, whereas Mr. Smith has only moderate and not significant adverse effects. So perhaps we can just focus on the difference there, and you perhaps take us to your photographs in order to demonstrate the difference between you.
Yes, this is quite a key area to explore in terms of the visibility and the sequence of views here. It's a very prominent location, and the sequence of views are elevated quite high above the valley floor and have very clear views of the proposed development in a number of locations. In the photo montages that have been provided, some of them they reflect the more moderate effects that can be experienced for visual receptors here, for people walking here. But there are quite a number of opportunities to have much clearer views of the proposed development. And so I've included a number of photographic views, which I've broadly annotated to indicate where the proposed development would lie in that. And that's intended to sort of demonstrate that there is a sequence of views. These are intermittent views. There is scrub or woodland or hedgerows at various locations along this area. But where views open up, the photographs I've included illustrate what those views contain.
And we see in your figure B1, which is in your appendix B, the locations of the photographs you have taken. And again, we can leave the inspector in due course on site to view, but if you could just summarize your view as to why there are significant effects from a number of these viewpoints.
B1 is the view furthest from the site in this sequence, on Winter Hill, as it's known. And this is a location where footpaths rise from the floodplain in two directions. This is the more easterly direction. But plots 1 to 3 are visible even from here. In terms of, sorry, the development on plots 1 to 3 will be visible from here. With the Thames, there's a tree-lined edges to the Thames, and woodland in and around the lakes to the east of the site. But we can pick out either side of the bottom of my marker for roughly where plots 1 to 3 are. The poplar trees that are lining the A4155 primarily, so they give an indication of the scale of development that will be visible from this location. And then the sequence follows on. So B2 is a useful one. This is climbing from the valley floor up the sides. So this is open access land, both B1 and B2. Public rights of way and open access land. This is the same position as another view. Sorry, I need to remind myself what that number is. But one of the appellant's photomontages for this, which takes a much wider angle view. But here we can see, again, very scenic Thames corridor, and we can pick out parts of the site in the background where the poplar trees are, for example, behind which we have parts of Marlow visible. And for the most part, we can see residential rooftops in here and glimpses of 1 or 2 other commercial buildings. And photo view B3, we're higher again. We're now in the on the location of the Chiltern Way regional footpath. And this is a view that also appears as a photo montage. I think photo montages R and S and are useful to look at in this regard. Yes, please.
The R and S.
Sorry, do S.
Is that CD2 106 Z J and ZK? I think.
The US is a ZK.
And in terms of effects,
So
what to draw out from those?
in the proposed view, you can see sort of quite a marked change from the existing view. We have just beyond the lakes, we can see in the middle ground. Sorry, this is the existing view for view S. At the centre of this view, just beyond the lakes, the white rectangular, what appears to be building, is actually Westhorpe House, part of Westhorpe House that was clad in scaffolding at the time, so that's a reference point there. Behind that and to the left, we can see a little bit of, we can see Marlow International, which lies just beyond the A404, and we've got Marlow Town lying behind that. But the vicinity of Westhorpe House, the area to the right of that, both foreground and background, is scenic countryside. If we look at the proposed view, then we can see to the right of Westhorpe House and behind it, actually, a significant number of new buildings appear in this landscape, and their scale is quite evident from here, as well as the density of built development. And this appears as a very substantial expansion of urban development into this view. And you know, the magnitude of change is high, and for that reason, I feel that, you know, this is quite a significant visual effect as a result of this in the scenic view.
Okay, again, we can leave the inspector to form judgments in due course on
Yes.
site. Anything else you want to say about the visual effects in views from Winter Hill, Mr. Kennett?
Just to reiterate the point about the intermittent nature of these views, one of the things that we were critical of for the Gillespie's review was that there was a sort of quantifying of visual effects by, for example, what length of a footpath might be affected. But I don't think that really reflects the nature of, you know, the amenity and the views from those footpaths. So here there is, because there is a very attractive view at those intermittent locations, it lends a sense of anticipation, and it's an integral part of the variety along, for example, following parts of the Chiltern Way or other footpaths that the view is enclosed for some of that time and then opens up to an attractive view and then closes again. So that's where the importance of these views are. It's not that they occur everywhere along this area or along a route, but where they do occur, they make a very valuable contribution to the amenity of that footpath and the views from it. Yeah.
Good. Then I think in terms of conclusion, you set out in your main proof of conclusion in terms of the assessment of the scheme against the relevant policies. We can take that as read. Is there anything else you wanted to add at this stage, Mr. Kennett?
No, I think that's it.
Adam, thank you. That's the evidence in chief.
Thank you very much. Okay. 1 second.
Before we conclude, could I just ask Mr. Kennett to clarify a point which I think is just a typographical error, but just to confirm, I just want Mr. Kennett's view, because I just think it's clear in your table on landscape effects.
Was this?
Rebuttal.
Yes, in the
D.
rebuttal D1, I just think you there should be some bold where there isn't, and I just wanted to confirm that rather than spend time tomorrow. Under the Thames floodplain, the landscape receptors. Shouldn't your first major, moderate, negative, shouldn't that be in bold? Because as I understand, the bold is where significant effects are identified. Or maybe you didn't do it because of the one below, but I just, on your criteria, it seemed that that one should be in bold.
The Thames floodplain is the,
Beyond the site, under Bucks Council, you have major, moderate, negative east of Marlow.
Page 13, that helps.
oh, I see.
Sure, it's a tiny point, but I just thought that it accurately, and the inspector might wonder about this, and I certainly have wondered about it. Shouldn't major, moderate, negative east of Marlow be in bold because it's moderate, major?
You are correct, yes.
Yeah, it's not, yeah, just for accuracy, yeah. Thank you, thank you. I enjoy seeing you tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Sure, Mr. Kennett can't wait. Okay, Mr. Kennett, you are now in the middle of your evidence, so you can't speak to your party about your evidence or anything to do with it. You can discuss the weather and lunch and things like that, but you can't discuss the case.
That's fine.
Understood?
Yes.
Thank you. Right, anything else to raise before I adjourn until this evening? Nope. Okay, so we're adjourned until 6 p.m. tonight when we will hold the evening session. I've got, I think I did, we're not adjourned yet, 'cause I'm carrying on. Did anybody from the council get the list of people who wanted to speak? But when I asked for people to go over to Mr. Restief yesterday morning. He's coming in. This afternoon. That's great. Thank you. Okay, we're adjourned until 6 p.m. tonight. Thank you very much.